Good evening, everyone. And this is Abhivardhan from Global Law Assembly and, of course, the Indian Society of Artificial Intelligence and Law. Here we are with the flagship panel of the Indian Conference on Artificial Intelligence and Law 2021 to conclude with. And when I say flagship panel, it is a flagship panel because for the first time we are opening a very important, not just a Pandora box, but also a very important intellectual discourse on Bharatiya civilization from a perspective of aestheticization of a disruptive technology called as artificial intelligence. Now, this is something which becomes important to discuss because, of course, digital feudalism and other issues related to them, digital colonization, are a problem, a global problem, not just an Indian problem or an American problem. It's a global problem. A larger perspective comes in is that if there is an Indian response to it, how it should be framed, and how the Indian philosophical as well as cultural principles, mores, and considerations which we have been developing as a Bharatiya civilization for years, we have saved them, our ancestors have protected them. How are we going to use some of it in a very perpetuated sense, and how are we going to develop ideas which make sense? There are a few scholars who have worked on some distinct ideas, like I can name two books which are very interesting to read from a Bharatiya perspective. One is on constitutional law and one is on artificial intelligence and international affairs. So the first one is by J.S.I. Deepak, which is India, that is Bharat. He starts on the history of the League of Nations and the Monte for reforms and all of that. People should read that book. It's actually a bestseller now, according to Bloomsbury. So congratulations to Sai for that. And there's a second book which people should read is by Rajiv Malhotra, entitled Artificial Intelligence in the Future of Power. So I would be very happy to introduce the panelists with us. We have Dr. K. Parmeswaran, who is an associate professor and former associate dean at Gujarat National University, India. And we have Ashwini Sharma, who is the founder at Madhyam Law Associates. And we also have a very special greeting, I would say special remarks from somebody who we wish to invite, and he was very delighted to come, but due to time constraints, he could not. So here we have the special remarks by Professor Subhash Kar, PhD. He is a distinguished scientist and the chair of the Taksha Artificial Intelligence and Cybersecurity TAISCS Center. He is a Regents Professor in the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. So, as we present these special remarks, I would really hope that as we start the discussion on Indic virtues and how they play out accordingly, a lot will be learnt as well as a lot will be discussed. So, we begin this discussion by featuring the remarks by Professor Subhash Kar.
It's about AI and the Indian situation. First of all, we all know that AI is going to be playing a greater role because of the complexity of the embedded systems and the interconnections that exist in the world and the amount of data. Now, although it doesn't quite mean that it would be possible to deal with this data intelligently, or algorithms can deal with all kinds of issues that enter into human nature, which is what is required for a proper application of law. But in reality, in spite of this shortcoming, it is inevitable that humans will cede more and more of decision making, not only in general affairs, but also in the application of law to AI. And this creates a lot of big challenges. And perhaps the challenges are even more serious for India as compared to other countries, because in contrast to the West, where there is a predominant focus on the body, on the individual as a physical being or a physical body. In India, the individual is seen not just as the body, but also the Purush or the self which resides within him. Now, it is true that um, Indian law, as far as I understand it, in the last 70 years, has taken primarily from Western examples, and it still remains primarily colonized, as are many other institutions that India inherited. But still, one can see that there would be greater challenges to it over the next few years as India also becomes wealthier, Indians gain more agency, and anachronistic institutions such as the Supreme Court not allowing any language but English, and thus disenfranchising 20% of the world's linguistic population. These things will eventually go, and there would be a greater effort to look within the Indian tradition uh, to look at these problems. And this looking within the Indian tradition will not happen only in India but also overseas, because the Western neoliberal project is entering a very difficult phase. There is tremendous despair in people, and not because they're not materially well off. As we know, just last year, 90,000 mostly young Americans in the best of their health and in a state of prosperity died because of opioid overdoses. And why does that happen? Because the concept of the individual in the Western framework does not do justice to all aspects of an individual's personal experience. And these are just the aspects which the Indian tradition has given the greatest significance to. And therefore, these issues will come in, and these issues generally stand outside of the purview of algorithms, because algorithms can only deal with things with physical bodies at best, which is why you have strange decisions as in the West, uh, where uh, sometimes judgments are based more on outer appearance than the capacity of individuals to do things. In other words, it's the ancient attitudes towards race, etc., which, in spite of all the changes that have occurred, still remain quite entrenched. So, to conclude, I would say that uh, perhaps AI will have to be supervised in ways which we cannot foresee right now, and the limitations of AI will have to be accepted, and new ways of perhaps taking advantage of AI techniques, of algorithms in collaboration or in conjunction with decision making by human beings will have to be incorporated, and that might lead to techniques which would be useful not only in India but elsewhere as well. I'm sorry I was not able to join live because I have another lecture to give at about the same time. But thank you, Abhivardhan ji, for inviting me, and the very best to you for this session.
We really aspire that we host Dr. Kak maybe next year or maybe in our future conversations. So, as this discussion has to begin, a very firm ground has been put up on the role of artificial intelligence, and uh, one interesting thing which I found was that there's a very specific feature of AI which we as scientists, lawyers, and even policymakers are kind of worried also and concerned in a very positive way, which is that it is quite omnipotent and omnipresent. Now, these are very hardcore terms, so I'm making it a bit simple for the viewers. Something omnipotent means it has a potential in various ways. Something which is, I'm not using the word antaryami, that's very unjust to use. I'll say sarvavyapi in some ways, not in all ways, but in some ways. Something which is omnipresent is which is present everywhere. So it is like you're present everywhere, which means you have a lot of accessibility as a technology when it comes to your role and so forth. Now that affects your economic livelihood. It affects your digital as well as basic rights because we see that. Considering that, uh, your cultural aspirations and culture matters a lot because of its relationship with, uh, I would say, the metaphysics involved in the intelligent quotients as well as the knowledge economy. So, in a very on a very basic note, since we know that despite data issues and despite other flaws, AI is very omnipresent. I'd like to ask the panelists to give their insight, maybe starting with Dr. Parmeswaran first, as to how should we understand it from a cultural economy perspective, and from there, of course, we can start talking about Rita and the relationship of dharma here, and then we can deep dive into. But I'm getting a little bit on materialism only because if we give some tangible framework here, then we can move faster ahead to the philosophical aspects of dharma and Indic philosophies. So, sir, please proceed. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bivardhan. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much for this wonderful invitation and this IndoCon 2021. I wish a great success and in the coming years also to have a great movement forward. But having said that, the AI as omnipresent and omnipotent disruptive technology. I'm not a person from AI science, or I'm not into the mainstream science and algorithm and so on, but I purely see things from a constitutional perspective, from a social perspective, from a human perspective. To me, technology, whether it is disruptive or not disruptive, a disruptive technology can be positive or negative. Can be, I think there is echo that is coming. Is my voice clear?
Your voice is clear, but I think I'm so sorry, Ashwini. I had to mute you. I think the echo is from your side, maybe from your device, perhaps. I think so. Your voice is clear, but I think I'm so sorry, Ashwini. I
Yeah,
had to
now
mute
it
you.
is clear.
I think the echo is from your side, maybe from your device.
Is it clear now?
Clear, but I think I'm sorry, Ashwini.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the echo is from your side.
Yeah, the artificial intelligence from the point of view of constitution, from the point of view of law and justice, I would like to address few issues. The disruptive technology, whether it is positive or negative, right or wrong, depends on two key factors. And these two key factors we get from the constitution. And constitution has already given us the direction of how we should move ahead in life, especially in a collective life. One, technology that helps human life, be it the social level, political level, economic level, all these, that which deals with the externalities of human life, that which deals with quantifiable things. If there is going to be a positive movement forward, then it is positive. And it is a positive technology we should not fear. But this condition alone will not be enough for us, because the second condition which comes to us, which the Constitution speaks about in the fundamental duties in relation to scientific inquiry, reform, and humanism, they speak about the human dignity. So, whatever technology that we are going to adopt by the state and the trade and the commerce, it's not only about the social, cultural, economic, political development, but also about the ultimate, utmost freedom of choice in which the dignity exists. If these two things are taken care of, it becomes very easy for us to decide whether the positive disruptive technology is a welcoming one or not. All that needs to be seen is that the two key tests: development for individual life and collective life, without cancelling dignity, the freedom of choice. These are my quick two takeaways. Maybe I would request Ashwini ji to take it ahead and then we will again come back.
Thank you, Dr. Parameshwaran ji. So, Abhivardhan, I note your point that AI is omnipotent, omnipresent, at least not tangibly, but that's the direction it is apprehended to be headed to. And with that assumption that it will be omnipresent, we need to be very clear that we shouldn't adopt a confrontationist approach to it. It is something which has to be co-opted. Then, having said that, how do we evolve a framework to view the developments, firstly? And then, do we have to look at it from a specifically Indic Bharatiya perspective in order to assess if the types of responses need to be any different? Coloniality or not, there is a certain constitutional framework right now through which new developments can be viewed. And then there is a Indic perspective, but then that kind of research and discourse hasn't developed to see how much of Indic perspective is aligned with the constitutional perspective or if there is any deviations or not. But at least this much we should be clear about AI, that we don't have to take a confrontationist approach to it. We don't have to suffer from a siege mentality to view AI as something which is going to be very disruptive in our lives. It can, if managed well, it could be a great opportunity for the Indic perspective to flower worldwide. And why I say that is because digital media is now the reason for fastest consumption of culture. So memes become fashionable in a day's time. Any new music becomes viral in an hour. Cryptocurrency prices, they go up in 15 minutes. So actually it's an opportunity for quickly spreading any particular perspective, idea, meme, culture. So it is both an opportunity and a threat. It's a threat only for those who will be sleeping over it. It's an opportunity for those who are actively looking at it as a new world to explore. So those will be my thoughts on the omnipresent nature of it, because we have to embrace it. We have to look forward to explore it if we are working on the assumption that it's going to be around us like an ocean.
Sure. So I think this is a very good ground to start with. I definitely agree that we need not a balanced approach but an adaptive approach, because I think we don't live in the age of equilibrium. In fact, India's principal economic advisor Sanjeev Sanyal usually says in various public meetings that the age of equilibrium is gone. We don't live in the laissez-faire or the complete five-year plan socialist world anymore. We are in a world which is mixed, and adaptability makes civilizations, not equilibrium. Because equilibrium means you start with this part to this part. It's A to B. What if it goes to C? You can just try to stop the tap by pulling the lever and all of that, but if it flows and breaks the barriers, then what? So I think this is a very good way to start with. And of course, this is a very important discourse to start with, because as both of you very rightly pointed out, that we understand that digital feudalism is a problem, artificial intelligence is omnipotent and omnipresent, and the omnipotency of course is not much, but omnipresence is a lot. Maybe that's also a reason that we feel a lot that it is there. Another thing which should be taken into consideration is what are the real issues where an Indic approach could be taken into considerations. So my next question is with regards to the aspect of soft power. So viewers know what is soft power in general. It's a concept coined by Joseph Nye Jr., but what it simply means is that the concept of power itself starts things altogether. So, of course, it's related to the state, but it's not directly related to it because, of course, there are non-state actors like MSMEs, NGOs, and all of those who actually wield their influence. That is basically what soft power is. Now, howsoever they do it, for example, the US is a soft power empire. That's a simple example of it. To an extent, China also tries to be a soft power empire, but nor the Confucian councils have been successful. Neither they have been successful, nor TikTok is. Although I would not say it's not successful, but it's still getting backlash anyways. TikTok is already getting backlashes in various countries. So I think to see this further, did we really have that kind of approach of soft power? And I'm not talking about only from a governmental perspective, because again, defending of sovereignty and considerations of sovereign integrity, which we say national integrity, is something which is a very primitive aspect. But the second order effect comes by the role of the private actors. They include the academia, the corporations, the think tanks, the technologists, all of these. So, on that perspective, I would like to ask the panelists to give their views as to whether this has been understood by the Indian psyche in general. And of course, when we say soft power, for China it might be expansionism because of the CCP. For America, it is neoliberalism. For Israel, it is something else. For Singapore, it is something else. But for India, I do not see any expansionist tendency because we are actually much of a weak state right now. And that comes from efficiency issues, rule of law issues, and so forth. So, Parmeshwaran ji, let's start with you only. What do you think in this regard? And maybe Ashwini can point out his views. Yeah. What do you
Just
think
to
in this
add a
regard?
line from the previous point, that instead of bringing the equilibrial approach in which we flatten things, we need to adapt. And in order to adapt, we must empower the state, the governance, the society, the academia, the research. They must create a forum, a platform in which this adaptability, this empowering happens. It is in this context, the second question which you have put is very apt, which is the soft power. If you see the history of soft power, the origins of it, and so on, it is basically, and it was basically brought to bring a kind of a pluralistic approach, because not all the states in the international community have same strength or same wavelength. Each and every country is different in their strength. Each and every country have their own potential. Thereby meaning, we need to see how India, or even to a larger extent, the Asian context and the world context, the European and the American context, they predominantly held the state, as it was told in the initial message given by the professor. It is largely trade and commerce and social and economic. The state was viewed as a technocratic state. It's perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that. But that doesn't suit to each and every state. Their civilizational strength and their kind of the inherent value with which they live for. Ultimately, it comes to the value of life, which everyone feels what it is. So, soft power will be a very important facet that can play a very crucial role in the AI and its development towards a positive aspect of it. I really enjoyed the first note that you made, Mr. Abhivardhan, that we don't take the mainstream antagonistic view, or from the view of Ashwini, who said that it is not a confrontationist approach. That's why I pitched in with the word constitutional approach, because Constitution of India is so flexible and so plastic. Leaving aside the time periods in which we have seen a one-sided approach or this or that, but that every constitution goes through all over the world. They straddle between extremes. But India as a country with maximum resilience and capacity is precisely because of the civilizational resilience and receptivity and a kind of respect for things. I understand things have gone little different in the last, say, 100 years because of various political reasons of the past. We are not going into that. Let's look at the future forward. So soft power needs to be tapped, because soft power also contributes to the trade and commerce, not from a purely materialistic point of view, not from a crude external quantitative point of view, but from a qualitative point of view. Even if you see the National Education Policy 2021, they give maximum scope for multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity and cross-disciplinarity, and there is a separate division in the education department for transdisciplinarity. This implies each and every country, even within India, each and every state, each and every region, district, they can come up with their own sense of requirement and need and adapt themselves. And if state empowers them, it's going to be a brilliant phase. But the only thing that which I can't say very clearly is about how algorithm works or how science works. All that I would say is, instead of having a confrontational approach, we need to have a constitutional approach which is adapting and empowering and helpful to all and retaining the utmost the dignity of life. This is my take. Yes, Ashwini ji.
So, coming to soft power, I want to just establish Purva Paksha for it before I go on to my views. So, soft power needs to have some aims, and soft power needs to serve a purpose. Otherwise, it could also exist merely as a fragrance for the sake of it, but if then we don't have to have any discussion about it. But if we have to discuss about it, there has to be a purpose which the soft power needs to serve, where hard power is failing to. So firstly, AI application has to be developed in our hard power sector with the AI capable warfare readiness. I don't know how far or near we are to it, because even other countries, US, UK, Israel, they are also like at a very early stage of it. But considering they already have a innovation ecosystem present, the pace could be much more faster over there. And then that is one aspect of it. But if we talk about merely the media aspect of soft power, like sort of a cultural interaction where Indian tastes and preferences are acquainted with the rest of the world, there again the digital landscape is a great opportunity. It runs as per a certain algorithmic function which can be learned by us. The way the machine learns us, we can also learn the machine. So we have digital marketers who are hacking the algorithms in order to achieve maximum virality within a short frame of time. But then there are actors with certain motivations. What those motivations are not sufficiently imbued with a sense of Indic lenses. It's a unconscious post-modernist pragmatism that is driving those motivations. In the sense, material objectives are the foremost underlying driving force without any aesthetic element to it. The aesthetics are missing. And coming to civilizational resilience, that is, in my view, I have a very pessimistic view over here. Civilizational resilience has been primarily because of our majority numbers so far, which we have retained. That can also be utilized in our favor on the digital landscape. You can see foreign YouTube influencers, sometimes they make content which is suited to Indians, because they know that if they make something for Indian audience, they are going to get a lot of likes. So this way we have the strength of numbers to influence the digital cultural landscape and exercise our cultural soft power. But for that, the Indian audience needs to be first imbued with the cultural aesthetics of the Indic perspective, which is currently missing. There is predominantly unconscious also coloniality enveloping people's perspectives, and it also reflects in their content.
I really appreciate the views. In case, because last time I did not ask for any follow-ups, so Dr. Parmeswaran, would you like to go ahead with the follow-up, and would you like to add something to what Ashwini said? In case, because last time I did not ask for any follow-ups,
Yeah.
so Dr. Parmeswaran, would you like to go ahead with the follow-up, and would you like to add
Yeah.
something to what
What Mr. Ashwini Sharma says, there is a context to it. He says that we need to fix the hard dimensions of it. Before we get into the soft law, the AI has to play a very crucial role in hard decisions and the hard systems which we are in. That's perfectly contextual to me. But I have another point to add to it, which is this idea of a system of a hard and soft is primarily a political power structure and a political system oriented, because we believe that a political structure or a state structure is always top down. That is the earlier mindset, probably say 100 years back and so on. But with the advent of trade and technology and liberalization and so on, and the AI coming into and the information communication technology coming into, there is a kind of a wide opening that is taking place. So it is also going to impact the hard structures in which we always believed that anything coming to human life, anything coming to social life, will always be necessarily a responsibility of top down. So we always want to fix the state first. We always want to fix the law first, which is perfectly fine. That is a transition we need to move ahead. And this problem is very acute for countries which are colonized, because for us legalizing justice is a very tall call. It's a very difficult task because we have gone through colonization. So we feel that law means it's the rule of law. Of course, it is rule of law, but we don't understand the social participation and each and every individual who have to adapt to the situation. So if we have this perspective, it is a parallel approach which we need to keep in mind. That one, in order to fill the transition of top down, the state, let us have the law, like how US has a law called the Digital Algorithmic Accountability Act and so on, which I have seen some time back. We can also have laws and all those things. But at the same time, simultaneously, we must also think of empowering and adapting or making the ecosystem in such a way that the Indian psyche inherently accepts things. The basic Indian psyche is expansive in nature. It is always wanting to expand. That's the nature of it. So if we have these two views, a balance of it, a harmonization of it, and then empowering to move ahead, it's going to be a very interesting phase. How it is going to be, it depends upon the participation of the society. We can't fix only AI, or we can't only fix the state, or we can't fix only legal systems. Ultimately, it is people driven. Ultimately, it is choice driven, and ultimately, it is we who decide things.
Great. Ashwini, would you like to give a follow-up, or should we go ahead? I think so.
Yeah, we can move to the next point.
Sure. So, I think digital coloniality is a very interesting issue, and it's also called as neo-colonialism. To be very honest, right? Many people call it neo-colonialism because they have similar tendencies. They have similar first-order, second-order policy effects when it comes to governments, as well as not government, basically companies. For example, in the last discussion we had on the Indo-Pacific, we discussed that there will be pseudo-states. What are pseudo-states? They can be your companies, they can be your NGOs, they can be your technology entities. Now, if we just take a confrontationist approach and we say, okay, fine, let's take action against them, that's a different issue altogether, because that has more to do with retribution, justice, and so forth. Of course, even the understanding of justice here would be different as far as the discussion is concerned, because we will be discussing about dharma. But I'm saying from a generic point of view that retribution could be there. But I think from a perspective of adaptability to compete, because even China tried to do so in its own way, but again, China has its own failures too also. because the Chinese companies like Alibaba, Tencent, etc., they adopted a neoliberal approach to kind of influence. Now their approach is being, of course, tackled by China in a different way. But whether will it have a long-term impact or not, it's a very interesting question to ponder upon. So, a question to the panelists is how digital coloniality and feudalism, and I'm asking it from a very anthropological or let us say amorphous perspective, and not from a perspective of being esoteric to the very question itself, as to how they affect aesthetic components of human life and how they compromise the sense of traditional sovereignty. Because first one is related to how our indriya, if I would have discussed in India, I would have said कैसे इंद्रियों पर प्रभाव पड़ता है, but I would say in English how are the indriya affected by the same. So how our senses are affected, how our vector of understanding is affected, and how does it affect or undermine sovereignty. So for example, to add on this, the recent feud which ended between the government of India and Twitter was only about a simple issue that the guidelines which were made by the government were not followed. Now, I don't wish to get into the guidelines, but one of the interesting issues of this matter was that, of course, as the feud is solved, there was one matter in the Karnataka High Court where it was actually stated, it is a media report which states that in front of the court, Twitter had said that they had not invested their basically they are not invested in the shares of Twitter Communications India. Now the problem is, we know that regulatory sovereignty matters for India and such a big country with a large population, of course, and with other things concerned from a maritime and landlocked perspective. Yes, you need to have an approach. So let us at least understand from an amorphous perspective of digital coloniality and feudalism affects us and can undermine traditional sovereignty. Of course, it can be compared with other societies if necessary. So I think we can start with Dr. Parmeshwaram again, and then Ashwini ji can proceed. With other societies if necessary. So I think we can start with Dr. Parmeshwaram again, and then Ashwini ji can proceed.
Yeah. So this idea of digital coloniality and feudalism, this is coming into a different shape right now. So this idea of digital coloniality, if you see, the earlier understanding of the coloniality or the earlier conditions, circumstances with which the colonial powers they had the sway and the feudalism and so on. It was precisely because the resources which were there untapped in the country, in the nature and in the sources, whatever be there, things that are there on the territorial land, who will appropriate those resources and who will make use of it. That's why we had the idea of public sector undertaking, which is largely from a socialist point of view. And when the idea of liberalization came, there was also an unrest. There was also a question whether we can give these resources to people who can understand what opportunity means and how to make the best use of it. But we are currently in a third stage, probably when socialist understanding or a social thinking, not socialist thinking in a political point of view, but from a core human life point of view, the social perspective, the collective perspective. Probably they also would have faced the new market regime which was coming. They also would have faced the same kind of a thing. But such a thing is not there right now. It is slightly different. Those days, it was science on one side, technology or trade and commerce on one side, society on the other side, and the state with the constitution that was looking into it, monitoring it. So constitution can say no, state, society is important, science, trade and commerce should subside. And that was largely drawn from a colonial perspective. We really don't know which will really work, whether fully market capitalism or fully social understanding or fully liberalism. None of these theories or none of these methodology have really worked to ensure the best of human life. But in Indian context, it is taking a different shape. That's precisely because the artificial intelligence which is coming into our side, it is no more society versus science, technology, artificial intelligence. It is no more this versus that. It is and. It has become one. Because artificial intelligence enters into the human domain, of course, whatever be the stages of the artificial intelligence, I don't know much about the scientific aspect of it. People say there is a preliminary understanding function of the capability of artificial intelligence which responds to the stimuli, which doesn't have a memory of its own. The second stage, it can develop its own pattern and predict, and third stage being choice being given. I'm not getting into that, but what should a society do here? Because state is here, constitution is there, and we have a past colonial mindset, we have a past feudal mindset, and here science, trade, and technology, and commerce, and artificial intelligence is continuously growing. Now we have come to such a situation in which the society, the human individuals, and AI, they are actually entering into the human sphere, not just only the social and the economic. AI, when it comes to solving problems, maybe we can welcome it. AI, when it comes to increasing the accuracy of data, maybe we can use it. AI, when it comes to giving high degree computational processes and data, we can give a scope to it. But we are only very worried whether AI will take away the utmost dignity connected with the Bharatiya civilization, utmost dignity connected with the self, which is very different for the Indian mindset than for any other non-Indian mindset. So we need to take an approach in which we have to stress the need of only one thing. Unless and until the awareness takes place, for which I hold educational space as the most important thing. Unless and until this narrative that which you are discussing right now takes place, we will not be able to arrive at a fruitful movement forward. It will either be this or that, or either be this or that, and there will always be a seesaw imbalance or some kind of a false equivalence being imposed. There won't be any adaptability and empowerment to move ahead. So we need to understand this whole perspective that science, technology, AI on one side, and society, it is no more versus this, that. It is an inclusion of it, for which the awareness of all these points have to come forward, as a result of which we will be able to understand how AI is going to impact me, and that will facilitate the legal process, that will facilitate the legislative policy making, that will facilitate the judicial interpretation, and so on. This is what I am thinking.
So, moving along the same lines as Dr. Parmeshwaranji, I would say that we should be open for business ultimately, as we had been in the past as well. So earlier there were no trade restrictions, there were no borders. The entire world was actually on a free trade system. And because of our industriousness, laboriousness, and artisanal capacity, we were able to generate the maximum trade surplus within the Bharatvarsh, and which is what attracted successive invasions. So what I mean to say is that we have lived in a open free trade system where we excelled, and we can do that even now with AI being there. Secondly, we have to make sure that we do not, even by the slightest margin, deviate from a constitutional human rights dignity perspective, something with which the European Union has already taken a lead. In order to exercise political sovereignty as well, which is through the GDPR. It's a fine piece of documentation for data protection, but which also ensures that a certain level of sovereignty moves along with every European. Same thing can be done over here as well, because if we follow, since GDPR is already there, and I don't think even before that the principle would have changed. If we follow any principle lesser than a human rights perspective, it will always be open to attacks. by newer innovations in principles, but human rights perspective is something which will make us immune. So why not just adopt it right now and develop our systems and be open for business, so that our sovereignty also, which will be subsumed within the human rights perspective, can also be protected, while not making us look like Luddites afraid of AI. Secondly, unlike the previous couple of centuries, now there is no way a different country will be able to exercise their sovereign power over another country through their merchants. So I think we should avoid the vocabulary of digital coloniality. We have coloniality, which is like a afterglow of what has happened, but digital coloniality is something we are saying in anticipation, which we should avoid, because digital colonialism is not going to be possible, because one country cannot extend their sovereign power over another country anymore now, with the kind of global systems and institutions in place now. But what is there is a tendency to gain data monopoly, for which we have proper legislative responses already in place. So we just need to ensure proper enforcement with alignment with human rights values. The the shell, the constitutional shell, em- which is not empowering, which is not taking away anything, but which is there, not favoring any one particular thing or system over another, is already there. And when need arises, we can always go back to it. I think the real challenge here, and which we should be frank about it also, is whether the digital landscape and AI and data monopoly and the new tech businesses do not end up eroding the cultural rootedness. But the thing is, as Dr. Parmeshwaranji pointed out earlier, for that challenge, we should stop looking at a top-down approach. But then it opens up another challenge when we look at it from individual perspective, because then the project becomes several times multiplied. It gets multiplied by every individual out there. If there is a top-down approach, you expect the state to roll out a project and then everybody follows it. But then when we drop that expectation, then the project becomes infinitesimally more, because now we have to reach out to every individual. But what do we reach out to every individual with? Those are the things which need to be materialized, because all of that, in my mind at least, all of that is the primordial, is in the form of a primordial matter right now. We need to form something out of it in order to approach, if at all there is an issue of digital coloniality. Because what I feel, it's not really an issue of coloniality, but more about an issue of competition. How competitive we are and how prepared we are, how our tech innovation is poised to meet the challenge head on, and whether change in Indian tastes and preferences are going to matter.
Quite interesting, I must say. I think with respect to digital coloniality, I think people who write about it and speak about it, they find one perspective, that it is of course not colonization in that sense, because coloniality is an attribute to colonize. So what essentially it means is that you are in a particular situation where yes, your particular resources are being affected. And again, coloniality is a concept which comes in the modern age. It has nothing to do with the ancient age. So if somebody says, okay, fine, some empire was pseudo-colonial in the, I don't know, ancient ages, then the person is heavily wrong on history as well as understanding of colonialism. But still, so I think it has more to do with pseudo states, as I said, which is big tech. Now, of course, competition is one thing, and I agree that competitiveness matters. But what happens is that there is a little element related to coloniality, and I'm not saying it from a perspective of being confrontationist at all. Why? Is because, and because my next question will be on that only. What generally happens is is that at a metaphysical and at least at a cyber level, which includes your digital, the soft component, what generally happens is that yes, the tools that we got, of course, the West pioneered in it, then China did it, then other economies did it. Even we had a contribution in the initial years in the 21st century. The problem was not the accessibility. So sometimes I even say to people that we are in a post-colonial world. We all are, not just the former colonized, but also those who were former colonizers. And the reason why I say this is because at the end of the day, you are interacting. China was also a semi colonial country to some extent, right? There were people from the West who had occupied China through other means, but China saved itself. Japan was also semi-colonized in many ways, but Japan came out of it. To an extent, Singapore also we could say semi-colonized or colonized in a proper sense, but it also came out of it. India also came. India's way was way different from others. Of course, it was not perfect, but it was whatever it was. So the next question is from a perspective of metaverse. Now, I see generally in the United States predominantly that an approach of metaverses is being created. That if technology is a part of your life, it's kind of a very uh, connected part of your life, then it impacts you, and the impact in such a way that uh, the whole aspect of intelligibility, the whole aspect of emotional and cultural intelligence is affected by artificial intelligence. We must always understand that the kind of technology we use, that definitely affects us cognitively. Does it mean that it is a very, I would say, what we call it, apprehensive effect in a very direct sense? Of course not. Human brain, it does not see things like that. But things which are not apprehensive, they can be done with like a dosage, right? They can be in a process. But yes, of course, when people become more intelligible and cognizant of the situations, they will come up with solutions. Then say, fine, okay, it is there, but let's not be overhyped by it, which is, I think, what Ashwini ji is trying to make out. And I completely agree with him on that. That it is, it should not be just about coloniality anymore. I think it's getting there, but fine. Recognizing that is a different issue. The solution is not that. The solution is fine. Let's compete there. So on that, to both the panelists and maybe Dr. Parmeswaran can begin again. Uh, how should we see the conception of an Indian civilization and its parallels with an AI-powered metaverse? Um in the West, what happens is, and particularly America, is that they see AI from a perspective of a top-down technocracy, and there's a concept of technology distancing which actually leads to such technocracy. Dr. Roger Bronsford from KCL, King's College London, wrote a book on Law 3.0 where he says that the whole structure of positive law was about coherentism. Then we went to regulatory instrumentalism, and now we are coming out to technocracy, the true technocracy of technology. Now it can be any technology, not just AI. Even blockchain can form a technocracy, but it will be decentralized technocracy, to be honest. If we don't talk about crypto, but smart contracts and other things. Of course, smart contract is a different issue, so I'm not discussing smart contract. But on a larger note, how should we see India as a civilization from a perspective? This might seem a little bit fictional, of course, because we're talking about metaphors. It's like Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I'm taking it for fun. Or we are talking about Chacha Chaudhary comics by Pran. So we are talking something a little bit pseudo-fictional and it's pseudo-factual. So I think we can proceed with this. So Parmeshwan ji, we can begin, and then Ashwini can give his thoughts.
Yeah, this is a very deep question, and to me, it is no more pseudo fictional. I see it is one of the most interesting questions. For me, we discussed so far how India should look at AI, the positive, disruptive technology, and so on, and we connected with constitution, human rights, state, and so on. So I'm connecting this to what you have said just now. The point is the when I say constitutional perspective, when even Ashwini says constitutional perspective, we both referred that the constitution is not from a borrowed lens or from a imported interpretation or from a a certain source of ideas which are parachuted from outside. It must adhere to the civilizational, cultural consciousness of this country. It is in this context what is most important for India, the conception of Indian civilization and its parallel with AI-powered metaverse. I find that India and Indians are the Indian side having the culture very seriously and very deeply rooted, civilizationally very strong. And if the constitution is able to adapt these things as the best interpretation or the best interest principle for deciding anything, then it becomes very easy for us to move ahead with anything. Which means three things I see. The Indian civilizational context has three important foundational pillars for our individual life and collective life. It not only deals with the social, economic, and political, psychological, it goes up to the spiritual and comes down back to the material, individual and collective, the flora, fauna, and everything. It's so such an integrated, continuous network of ideas and values. One, we need to see that there is a truth which is continuously evolving. That's why we are able to accept all kinds of reforms. That's why we have large amount of complexity and heterogeneity. That's why in India is a place of vibrant democracy and it is continuously moving ahead. It's precisely because we accept that there is a truth in everything. This is a very important point. Second is, this truth is not static. It is not reductionist. It is not rigid. It is continuously expanding. That's why we are able to move ahead with any kind of changes with a smile on our face. Even when you walk on the road, the kind of disparity we see, but yet there is no strong animosity. Exceptions may be there, I'm not going into that, but the generality, even when you walk on the road, the kind of disparity, there is a sense of harmony. There is a sense of binding, the bonding. So the first principle of the truth, that which is continuously to be seen in everything, and there is this continuous, this truth being continuous unfolding of itself, and that which is continuously unfolding is also unfolding. Also, is something very harmonious. So, since you have used the word Indian civilization, we have three words which are very useful for the AI technology coming into picture, with which if we have these three values, regain those three values. Government also works to regain those three values. Educational system also brings this narrative of three values. Policy making, interpretation, everything in which these three values are brought, then it will be very easy to move ahead. The three values being the Satyam, the truth, where everything is there, everything is the truth, truth is in everything. Then the idea of Brahat, that is continuously expanding, and whatever that is expanding and whatever that is true, and there is always a harmony that which is maintained. The Ritam, Satyam, Ritam, Brahat. This is the civilizational culture, this is the Bharatiya culture, this is the Dharmic tradition. As a result of which we are able to accept many things which have been put on us. And others have learned because of their trial and error experimentation which is being imposed on us. So these three civilizational values, they are inherent, intrinsically inside all of us, which may not be visible, which may not be easily tangible, but the impact of these three values are constantly coming in our life, as a result of which India has become a beautiful, powerful, democratic, all kinds of the nature of the state which has been experimented here. So with science and technology coming into play, with AI coming into play, if we have only this clear understanding of our civilizational Bharatiya culture, of the truth, of the expansion, of the harmony, we will be able to move ahead, no matter it is bottom up or top down, no matter it is coming only from the social angle or the economic angle or the political angle. We will be able to see everything if the ecosystem is bearing that in mind. No matter it is coming only from the social angle or the economic. This is my view. We will be able to see everything in the.
So I enjoyed listening to Dr. Parmeshwaran ji here, and with your kind permission, I would like to take a very contrarian stance. So, in my view, Dr. Parmeshwaran ji's thoughts over here flow from a utopian, idealistic perspective, which is good to have. Which is good to have because it always keeps you open to wonder. It lets you enjoy the full spectrum of life experiences. That's what idealism allows. However, I'm a little Cotelian, Machiavellian in my worldview, where Satyamev Jayate, yes, but the truth to victory of the road to victory of the truth involves constant battle between competing truths. And it is important to understand which phase we are at. Are we at a phase where the ultimate truth is nourishing our civilization, or are we on the road where competing truths are battling with each other? So we have a utopian worldview that ultimately okay, the essential Indic perspective is basically that nature loves diversity. That's why we are pluralistic from our very genes. But there are places on earth right now where that principle is missing, which makes me think that the road to ultimate truth is going to be a constant journey. There is not going to be a final destination, and we have to battle with a lot of pushes and pulls while always having that idealistic end game in mind. So, having said that, and with that kind of framework, with that kind of mental framework, I would say that the metaverse is, see, we are already in a metaverse because right now our virtual selves are interacting with each other. We have our social media profiles, we have our messaging applications, but these are all islands. Metaverse is nothing but a world where these the boundaries of these applications, their non-interoperability is expected to disappear. So there will be one virtual all comprehensive simulacrum where using one identity you could seamlessly move from different apps. You could move from Facebook to Twitter with that one identity. You don't have to create a separate identity on Twitter. You don't have to do a separate identity on Facebook. So Web 3.0 is something which is visualizing that kind of innovation in the future. So which means that uh, right now what happens is, so Twitter has a certain ideology or ideological bent and preferences through enforced through its community guidelines. Facebook also has a slightly non-objective ideological bent, again enforced through their community guidelines. Of course they are managed through AI and algorithms, but again that management occurs after the AI has been taught with certain examples. So of course, a human ideological perspective nonetheless creeps in, no matter how objective we would want it to be. Now, when we move to the all-comprehensive metaverse, these boundaries are going to disappear. So there is going to be a lot more opportunities for interactions. And since this is going to be a virtual, all-encompassing virtual simulacrum of our lives existing on the internet, it means it is like discovering the new world, which is up for land grab, both in terms of businesses, branding, marketing, cultural influence, soft power influence, and establishing the socio-economic equations and relations in the metaverse. Because this metaverse is something which we are going to frequent more in the coming years. So uh, our coming generation, the youth, is going to learn a lot about the world from this metaverse. At least it's expected to. Right now, they are also learning, but they are learning more because the algorithm is making them learn. Because the algorithm sends them notifications. If they like a particular type of content, the algorithm sends them more of that content. So they are learning more of that content which they are liking, and then everybody is unconsciously forming their own echo chambers. Hopefully, in the metaverse, taking a positive outlook at it, these echo chambers should collapse because it's expected to be borderless. Nonetheless, there is a big opportunity for land grab for every kind of ideology, and here our tech entrepreneurs need to be fostered and incentivized so that they are able to establish themselves as the first explorers, or at least following right after the first explorers. This is something which we shouldn't wait to leapfrog, like how we have waited for other types of technologies. This is because technology has a certain network effect to it. They tend to become entrenched. So therefore, it may not be suitable for us to wait for some time, see all the kinks, wait for the kinks to iron out, and then get on to claiming leapfrogging innovation done in a cheap manner. But the thing is, by the time we reach there, we don't know how things might be. And also, people, India has been averse to a first mover policy because they feel that it might be costly. They might not end up getting anything out of it, and instead losing money. But then the learnings that will come is going to establish a certain type of culture, a more proactive culture. And AI fueled metaverse is and should be taken as the first opportunity for us to innovate in our cultural mindsets also, because we have a tendency to be always recipients. We always have a tendency, and here again I'll point out something which Dr. Parmeshwaran said, that because of our three values, we have always learned and taken whatever comes to us. But my understanding is that we should now be makers rather than takers.
I really appreciate the comments by the panelists. To add on this, I think the best I would say is that uh, Balaji Srinivasan, a crypto investor, has said it very interestingly that the world is becoming, world is having a lot of nomad countries, and not just digital citizens are becoming inevitable. I would say even digital countries are becoming possible. So pseudo states, as I said in the beginning, is something which is a reality. How will we deal with them is a strategic point of view. And I think the syncretic as well as the metaphysical component of it, which leads us to a cyclic policy, because I believe, not I believe, but I would say I seek that the Indic approach when it comes to seeing things has been mostly cyclic. It starts from the way we look at our seasons. I'm giving the basics examples, but I think the way we see, we have been mostly cyclic. Linearity, of course, has been there in some issues, but I don't think so. Linearity has been our driver, because I remember a very interesting book by Bruno Mackayes, who has written on international affairs a lot. He says that according to Rabindranath Tagore and one also thinker known as Ahmad Jalal, I mean from Bangladesh, uh, whenever there's a contestation between Europe and Asia, there are European machines and Asian machines who contest with each other. Now, machine can be anything in a civilization. It can be an army, it can be your information warfare, counter squad, or we say directorate to handle information warfare, or it can be your mechanisms of dispute resolution. If for example, a company goes to Israel, a technology company, and says we want this particular data for, which is a sensitive data, it depends on the judiciary how it deals with it, how much strong in it is it when it comes to its jurisprudence. So I think these are our strategic assets, and I think Dr. Parmeshwaram very rightly pointed out this, the metaphysical component of it, while Ashwini points out on the, I think, realist considerations as to how the strategic assets to be used. So I think it's a good conversation. We're having a very good conversation of realism and spirituality together. So I think it's a very good conversation going on. Now, to conclude, I think two things I wish to mix up a little bit. Um, so I remember I had a discussion with Ashwini some time ago, and we were discussing that something from Rajiv Malhotraji's book, AI and the Future of Power, that um, AI can usurp a lot, and it can, for example, let me take a simple example. Let us say there is an individual. So an individual has an aura. The aura can spread around, right? And the aura is basically of the externalities which the individual suffers from, or let's say faces particularly. So the externalities can deviate you. It can make you multi-directional, but it can deviate you, which is akin to saying that there's a myth that, you know what, people should be multitasking, but in reality that never happens. It's not multitasking, because then you are deviated a lot, and then your mental cognition is affected, your brain is affected, because then you are not able to do the work. It's not multitasking basically. It's deriding and also affecting your consciousness as well. And I would not say consciousness, but cognition, to be very honest. So let us say that there are externalities which are affecting you. What should be a dharmic response to it? Now, there, Rajiv Malhotra ji says that Sanatan Dharma focuses on all of this becoming one vector, focusing on the whole aspect of the dharmic notions itself, as to how to let the individual become a better part of the collective of the civilization in its own unique and diverse way, which is again structurally stable and contributory. Here, I remember that Ashwini's perspective was that sure, that is one impediment to see forth, but even there, and I wish to share a video, but I can't share it right now. Balaji Srinivasan made it viral on Twitter. There was a video on Indian civilization from a cyberpunk perspective. So if people know cyberpunk, it is like it is your designing of things, and you do it with those lights. The 90s Japanese theme. In Hong Kong also was it popular. So they showed that if you want to read the Vedas, the rishis in the future, let's not say the rishis, let's say the Mahant and all of those people, they read the Vedas and the scriptures through a hologram. And I can't show the video right now. I don't have it. I would have showed it to the viewers. It would have been very interesting perspective from an aesthetic point of view. But I think there lies the catch. So mixing two things. Let us say we have a civilizational audit, where we say there are some transactional aspects. If we want to transact something from other aspects, let's take them. Of course, we are taking them every day, but there should be an adan pradan mechanism which should be decided, which I would say could be kind of an a la socio audits of algorithmic bias through an indic approach. So if we see a technocratic prakriti, how should we see civilizational audits to conclude this discussion, and where in such a technocratic prakriti we see an avenue of opportunities as well as human evolution? Because as I said, in the West the problem is linearity. They're still stuck in linearity, so they will only go for linearity. Cyclicity, of course, in some aspects the West has cyclicity, but that is not coming up at a general level, and that's what is affecting them. China is also suffering from that to some extent. So avoiding that extreme linearity in policy and second order and third order effects, which affects human dignity and human rights anyways, because a very noted scholar has said that the three generation approach of human rights has a lot of flaws. Instead, a cyclic approach should be there, that human rights are something which are generally more about focusing on human dignity and its own perpetuation instead of self-exploitation. I would like to know what the panelists think. So maybe we can start with Dr. Parmeshwaran, and then Ashwini can proceed. Instead of self-exploitation. I would like to know what the panelists think. So maybe we can start with Dr. Parmeshwaran, and then Ashwini can proceed.
Yeah.
I would like to know what the panelists think. So maybe we can start with Dr. Parmeshwaran, and then Ashwini can proceed.
The whole argument of the artificial intelligence, the trade and commerce, whole argument, the legal perspective, the justice perspective, which we have, all these discussions, when we are discussing these things, the reasoning behind the discussions or the outcome that we expect on these discussions, they are still not fully Indic. They are not yet fully Bharatiya. They are not yet fully on the civilizational front. It looks like that we all have been completely in the Bharatiya tradition, but suddenly something happened. The political colonization, the invasions took place, like how AI is having a disruptive technology, like that a political disruption took place for thousands of years. Suddenly we got lost, and then we again come back. The modernization developed, the legalization of rights, the legalization of justice, all these have developed. But rest of the civilizations are able to pick up very easily, like you said, this linearity, the cyclicity, and so on, because they have only 2-3 variations. Whereas a country like India, we have projected a scheme of life, a vision of life, a mission of life in such a complete free way, in a complete flexible way, in a complete plastic way, with which the daily practices also constituted a suppleness, developed a suppleness to adopt these kind of things. So my only worry is that are we discussing all these things in the same context in which we are trying to find out solutions to the problem which are the solution methodology which the non-Bharatiya tradition developed it, or are we going to have a different method of solution? Because ultimately the audit comes into picture, the civilizational audit which we talk about. On what parameters we will do the audit? What are the parameters? How do we do the test of subjectivity? How do we do the test of objectivity? It's very difficult. What was considered as an essential property right of the land, and then what is considered as a human right, and what is now considered as a human dignity, and what is now considered as a human flourishing, and what is considered as an integral well-being, there is a complete shift which is taking place. So the greater the consciousness, deeper the consciousness, higher the consciousness in the realm of life, our framework to understand what a problem is or what is a problem and what is a solution completely changes. So understand, we are thinking of a solution like how a non-Bharatiya tradition will look at a problem. But we want to include our Bharatiya tradition also. But again, we want an audit also. How do we do that? That's why India as a country has become the most challenging, most interesting, most adventurous place to come to, because we have a different way of looking at life. Even for example, if I can take Ashwini's argument, the last argument, he said he has a contrarian view. But that methodology of contrarian view is itself not the Bharatiya tradition, because in Bharatiya tradition there is no such thing as contrarian view. It is all inclusive. So as much I have a view, as much as you have a view, we don't see it as one versus other, where the linearity comes into picture and after a point of time a cyclicity coming into picture. It is all their trail and their approach which we are trained in our education, so we think like this. So I have a very genuine concern here. How do we look at all these kind of things? Where do we move ahead? But I don't want to leave a negative note here. I have a very positive note that India as a tradition, India as a culture, India as a civilization, and the whole legal philosophy or the legal systems or the legal machinery, the administration of justice all over the world is now looking for pluralism. And they are saying that pluralism is very important, which means if India comes up with its own civilizational quest, regaining the civilizational understanding, bringing it to the level of education, bringing it to the level of the social, cultural, political, economic, and so on, we have a different view of things. And here we need to make a very important caution. With this, I stop here. That the Indian Bharatiya Sanatana Dharma tradition is not something going away from life or going away from world. It is completely inclusive of life at all levels. The idea of materialism as a spiritualism is also a Western notion, which is being put on us, maybe last thousands of years. But the Indian idea of Sanatana Dharma is one continuous stream of knowledge and experience and practices on a daily basis with no division, no discord and dissension. So if we have that, everything becomes a part and parcel of life, and everything becomes part and parcel of each and everyone's dignity and freedom and choice and the enjoyment of it. This is the ideal we should keep. If we make this as an utopia, again, utopia is a foreign understanding of it. What I mean to say here is that this ideal is just not an ideal away from life, because the idea of understanding what is an ideal is something away from life, something cut off from world. No. In India, the Bharatiya tradition, the civilization is ideal is inclusive of life at all levels. There is no distinction, there is no difference. It is universal, it is inclusive, it is non-sectarian or non-divisive. Unique recognition of each and everything at every place, the respect for culture, the flora, fauna, and above all, living towards a planetary spirit and imbibing that spirit and then coming out. So, if we have this, we may have to rethink of what we are doing when we say, when we use civilizational audit, when we use the word top-down or bottom-up approach. These all have come as a result of divisive thinking, or lopsided thinking, a linear thinking. I understand the goal that we need to achieve is very far, but to me, those who follow the tradition, it is not very far, it is very much within inside us. This needs to be brought to the level of education, is what I feel. So this context needs to be kept in mind when we talk about civilizational audit and so on. That's my view. This needs to be brought to the level of education, is what I feel. So this context needs to be kept in mind when we talk about civilizational audit and so on. That's my view.
I completely agree with Dr. Parameshwaran's view on this, and but I maintain a dichotomous perspective on it. So while I don't deny what Dr. Parameshwaranji says, because that's true, but my thinking is challenged by something I read about what Kautilya is alleged to have said. Like history books say, but I don't know. Like history is whose story, I don't know, but it's attributed to Kautilya, and he said that the power and royalty and all materialism, all of these things are immaterial, of course. Consciousness, soul, dharma, and all those are of primary importance. However, what he also said that power needs to be manipulated and manifested in order to maintain dharma. So, an all-inclusive, idealistic, coexisting society has to be maintained. It's I don't know how much truth there is to saying that the natural order of things will always gravitate towards it, like how an apple thrown from a certain height will always fall down to the ground. I don't know how, whether it will always gravitate to a pluralistic, harmonious, coexisting setup always. And that is why I feel there has to be an interventionist perspectives and ideologies designed to maintain the pluralistic structure. And then there is another challenge that the means also matter as much as the ends. So one cannot establish a pluralistic structure with a divisive approach, which makes the intervention, which makes finding the right kind of intervention very challenging. So here, because the challenge is quite complicated in terms of what finding the right kind of intervention to maintain the idealism without affecting anything while going on that path. Understanding the requirements of such an audit is also going to be quite a tough task. But nonetheless, an effort should be made towards it. And J. Deepak's book is a step in that direction. I think it's going to be a fountainhead. So two things I like, big takeaways from his book. One is the idea of consciousness is what permeates the Indian civilization, and it's not identity. So, and the second is the existence of Bharat before 1947. So we can start with these two perspectives if we have to attempt a civilizational audit. And by that I mean to say whether that kind of perspective is given enough prominence on the metaverse, whether there is diversity of views which takes into account that perspective. Because through my use of social media, I have frequently come across social media users who like to take a stance that India did not exist before 1947. The contrary stance also needs to have a place in the social media shelves. So whether the algorithms support that kind of perspective, they don't have to actively support it, but then they should also not act in such a manner that a certain kind of view which takes the belief that India did not exist before 1947 should not get a free run. And that is something which we can take as part of an audit of all algorithms if we have to undertake that exercise. Then that's just a start. That's just a one point. It might not even be a start. I don't know. But if since we are discussing this topic, so yeah, that's one point I can offer.
Before Dr. Parmeshwaran wishes to add something, once Dr. Parmeshwaran adds his views, of course, I will give my views to conclude this illustrious panel. So,
point to add to what Ashwini has said, that I don't think we both disagreed in any way in real terms. The point here is that the Indian tradition, the Indian civilization, the Bharatiya, it's just not only about peace, it is also about power. It is just not only about Shanti, it is also about Shakti. One interesting Ministry of External Affairs document sometime back I happened to see, it is still there in their website, where the current government had projected 2021-2022 new norms of orientation for reformed system. This is a document to be presented in United Nations, I suppose. It is also written as United Nations Security Council document. I think probably they are submitting that.
yes.
They talk about the respect, the dialogue, the cooperation, the peace and prosperity, committed to multilateralism, rule of law, and fair and equitable international system. In all these things, our value is very broad framework, but at the same time, we are not shying away from taking an interventionist approach if required, and that interventionist approach is required, method is made to protect this Bharatiya civilization. That is exactly where my whole focus was on. Because if we lose this approach, this model, global model which we are having, if we lose this, it will be a loss not only to the country and to the constitution, but also to the whole world. So I fully agree with the interventionist approach, which is very much required, and that is also part and parcel of the original tradition, the original Bharatiya tradition. But when we use the word Bharatiya tradition or the Sanatana Dharma and the Indian Sanskriti, there is an understanding which is slightly misplaced or which is slightly, not that completely true. That taking world and life, viewing world and life as something completely illusory. Because from the West, a strong materialist approach was put on us as against the self and the transcendent with which the civilization got developed. But it was not the only thing with which it developed. It also developed along with the lines of Shakti and power. Even if you see in our Indian traditional cultural practices, Shakti is always worshipped, power is always worshipped, materialism is always worshipped. but it has to be balanced by the self. It has to be balanced by the peace, the shanti. So if we have this approach, I feel that we both have come to a common ground in which we feel where the necessary intervention is required, it is required. Where the self approach is required, not get lost into the materialist, externalizing things, and all time thinking only of the social and economic and the political voice of it, but also thinking of the self and the spirit. Because ultimately, it is the self and the spirit which is going to enjoy the social, economic, and political. And that makes life more beautiful, which is exactly what the whole of the Indian tradition is all about. That's where I stop here.
So to let's collate and converge for the sake of continuity, as we say in Bharatiya civilization, because um, I think even from, and I understand that realism is related to materialism in some way. So realism in international relations tends us to think like that. But I think realism is also important, but it doesn't mean that it should be substantive. It should be procedural to some extent wherever necessary. I think that's what the catch from the comment. So I think to conclude, we can say that continuity should be a perennial, metaphysical, philosophical, let's say, as well as psychoanalytical perspective of human life, which of course translates with the true material world we live in, which we do not consider as illusory but a part of our life in a much comprehensive sense, which of course translates to things like sustainability, economic livelihood, and all of those things. I think with their Manav Saksharta also comes in, Atmanirbharta comes in, all of these wonderful terms we use. So, to conclude with, I would say that this panel has been quite amazing. It would be mind-boggling for those who binge watch it, and I appreciate the people who will be watching us, uh, those who are watching us live, of course, and those who will be watching us later. So, I officially declare that with this, the Indian Conference on Artificial Intelligence and Law 2021 uh, concludes. I, as the president of the conference, declare that we will conduct IndoCon 2022, the third edition of the conference. It will be again an Indic and a global theme, or it will be something else, maybe with new design, new attitudes, new perspectives to come up with. So with this, I thank Ashwini and Dr. Kember Mishram for their presence, and of course to Professor Subhashka could not attend the session, as well as all the panelists and their moderators who attended this conference. Special thanks to Mudut Pal and Aditi, our members at ISAIL, and Manohar Samal, my dear friend, as well as those people who helped us making this conference successful from the ICL team as well as the Internationalism Global Podcasting. I would say that since people are following Internationalism Global Podcasts, I have an update to share, and I shared it in the Indistinct episode which I had with Raghav Krishnan from Rashtam School of Public Policy. So whenever we talk about culture and literature and art, so I'd like to disclose a little bit that I am actually a poet. I write in English and Hindi. Most of which my writings come from, are based on, our Indic characters like Ashwatthama, Draupadi, and so on, but also they are on metaphysics, philosophy, and sometimes physics. Music is a very interesting part of life. And if we see the Indo-European culture from Lithuania to Indonesia, we see that aspect of continuity in a much beautiful way where folk songs play a very important role. And that aspect of relationship is there. So here's a very interesting interview which we are going to have on October 6th. And I bet the people must attend it. It will be a very amazing experience, just a 30-minute interview. So here's the trailer for all the viewers. So this band is known as Go A. It's a Ukrainian band that came fifth in the Eurovision Song Contest 2021. Their song Shum, and the word Shum basically is related to the Indo-European languages. There is much deeper connection with praying the god, praying the gods for saying, "Fine, now we have winter. Please bring us the spring." and that is related to the crops and the whole agrarian society there in Ukraine. Post Cold War, bands in Eastern Europe came up and they showed their amazing music in pop rock and others. This band, of course, works in alternative rock, but the kind of tribal engagement it gives and the kind of happiness it gives is something which is very amazing. And I must recommend everybody to watch this interview on October 6th at 3 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So, with this, we conclude the live broadcast for the Indian Conference on Artificial Intelligence and Law. Namo to everyone, and thank you so much again. Good night.